Okay, thank you everybody. Thank you for waiting. We'll kick off now. So good afternoon to you all. Thank you for attending our webinar on loss prevention using the Internet of Things to reduce the impact and cost of escape of water claims. It really is an important topic given the frequency and cost issues that the market has experienced over the last couple of years. And as you'll hear in the presentation, a lot of work has been done across the market to address cost, but we think there is an opportunity to look at how claims can be prevented using technology and the Internet of Things, and that's really the purpose of our session. So a little bit about us. So my name is Sutcliffe. I am a director of Valentis Advisory. I'm an insurance professional of 30 years. And we provide support to businesses operating in the insurance risk and claims sector. I'm presenting today with colleagues from Polygon Group who specialise in loss prevention, mitigation and damage management, an area of our sector crucial to helping reduce the frequency and cost of water damage claims. I'll hand over to Jeremy Sykes, who'll introduce himself first of all.
Good afternoon everybody, thanks for joining and thanks to the MGA for the opportunity to do this presentation. Yeah, Polygon is a property damage restoration business headquartered in Sweden. Well, I guess we're the biggest of our kind worldwide, operating in many countries. So it might seem slightly weird that we're talking about how to reduce water damage claims or the impact of them because that's our business, but that's the way we see the future.
And Andreas?
Right, yes. Hi everybody, and thanks for joining this seminar. My name is Andreas Radlund. I'm Chief Operating Officer and co-founder of Untitled Labs, a company that is focused on technology to prevent property damage, basically. We were acquired by Polygon Group earlier this year. We are actually a spin-off from the insurance industry. Our founding partner Jonas, he used to be head of technology for one of the large Swedish insurance incumbents, and did in that role see the opportunity of applying modern technology within the insurance industry.
Thanks, Andreas. Now we don't just plan to talk at you for the next hour or so. We'd like to take questions as we go through the session, so please feel free to raise them in the chat. You can send questions at any time and we'll address them when we think it's relevant within the session, or we'll pick them off at the end of the session. We'll also be running 3 polls during the session, so please do respond to those polls. We'd love to hear what you think and what your feeling or your position is on the questions that we raise. There are just a couple of other housekeeping rules. So all videos and sound are off for attendees, protecting quality. I am in the wilds of Yorkshire and my internet isn't fantastic, so I'm going to turn my video off once I stop speaking, but we will leave the video on for Jeremy and Andreas as they talk through, just so that you can see who's presenting. The session will be recorded for use as a podcast by the MGAA, and that will be available on the website shortly after the event, so feel free to revisit the session afterwards. Some key learning outcomes. We presented these in the invitation, but effectively delegates attending this session should be able to better understand the challenges and opportunities in reducing the cost and impact of escape of water claims using the Internet of Things or technology. You should be able to cut through some of the jargon to understand the benefits of water usage monitoring, leak detection and shut-off devices, the service options of the common problems the industry faces, and to understand how the sector is developing and how this will enable delegates to add further value and business streams to their clients. I'd also like to thank the Managing General Agents Association for supporting and promoting this event. I know they've done a lot of work over the past couple of years, and certainly through the COVID-19 crisis and lockdown, to try and bring some interesting topics to you as members. Hopefully you'll find this to be interesting and thought-provoking as well. The association will be running a survey after the event as well, so please do take some time to respond to that and just let us know what you liked and what we could improve or do differently in the future. Thank you all very much for joining. and I will hand over to Jeremy.
Great, thanks, Ian. And yeah, there's some goals there that we've written to try to describe what we're going to try and get through today. But it's a pretty big subject, so we're going to slightly scratch the surface, but hopefully fill in a few of the blanks or give you some information. I'm aware also, of course, that there are some people who are probably fairly knowledgeable already on this, so please excuse me if I tell you things that you already know. Escape of water is a key peril in the UK, one that's been growing significantly, and with the growth is a growth in cost and a growth in inconvenience to everybody. So what can we do about it? I guess the first thing to say is that one size doesn't necessarily fit all. We're going to talk a little bit today about residential, we're going to talk about commercial, we're going to talk about businesses, office blocks, apartments, because it's not necessarily the same solution for all of those. So it's a little general, and if we have to get more specific, clearly we can do that outside of this this conversation. Next one, please, Ian. Next slide, Ian.
It's on its way, Jeremy.
There you go. It's been hand-delivered from Yorkshire. You may have seen this survey that was published very recently by Fitch, talking about the 3/4 of escape of water incidents in residential property are coming from burst or leaking pipes, and perhaps stating the obvious: if you can find out about them quicker, if you can do something about them quicker, if you can do something about them quicker, perhaps you can impact the cost both there and then to the property, but also the on cost to particularly a business. Next one in. And those of you who study the ABI data, again, I'm afraid this is as a residential view, but you can extrapolate to commercial. Can see that escape of water is around 30% of the entire indemnity spend of insurers when it comes to residential insurance. Though the frequency is much lower than some of those others. You know, a large water damage claim is probably a 2% kind of frequency. So if you turn that on its head, it's a once in 50-year event for an individual. But the cost here is very much larger than the frequency. So it's a key issue, and with people having more and more water appliances, having more expensive contents, etc. in their homes, it's one that we need to make sure that we use all our tools to do something about. Next one, please, Ian. And when it comes to costs going up, and insurers have certainly had to struggle with this, and we as suppliers into this sector have felt the sharp end of this also, because obviously it kind of rolls downhill. Certainly insurers have looked at saying, well, what are we going to do about some of this costs? There's all this extra plumbing, there's all these extra contents, there's all these suppliers who are involved in it. What can we do to squeeze costs in all these areas to impact this? Well, squeezing costs takes you so far. It doesn't necessarily come to a resolution, because costs are always going to rise. So we've got to think in a different way if we're going to really impact costs and the on issues, if you like, of cost, not just straight money, but actually the inconvenience, etc. And technology, including the Internet of Things, and the service perhaps that goes with just straight devices is a way of doing that. Next one, Ian. Insurers have had plenty of strategies to try to impact cost, looking at policies, making sure that the insured is not getting more than they're actually paying for. In the UK, and this is different to some other markets, as many of you probably know, other geographies, we are very cost conscious in terms of our policy premiums, and we have very little loyalty. So there are opportunities perhaps with some of this technology and this approach to do something about some of those things, making sure that people get what they pay for, but also impacting loyalty. Insurers have looked at fraud, increasing excesses, specifically for residential insurance. So instead of being 100 quid, you know, as you know very well, I'm sure, they're 500 or so pounds before anybody's getting anything back. Cash settling of claims, which in a water damage environment is not a great solution. A customer might say, oh yes, well, I'll take the money and go away. But if that means that a property is still wet, then that could end up being a bigger claim tomorrow. And making sure they've got good control, that's very important to insurers too. Next one, please. So there are three main areas that we would look at of trying to reduce the impact of claims. Trying to do something about the frequency of claims, how can we impact that? If something does happen, how can we make it less severe so that actually it causes less inconvenience, it doesn't put a business out of business, or the third one is payment. If something does happen and it really does and we've got to do something about it, how do we make sure that we pay them quickly so that we can get people back into their properties or back in business? Next, please. So looking at each of those, frequency, how can we reduce the number of claims? Well, one of the things potentially is to do pre-loss surveys. That's not necessarily going to work in a standard run-of-the-mill residential insurance policy. The ABI says that currently in the UK, it's, I think, 315 quid is a buildings and contents policy. Nobody can really afford to go and be doing pre-loss surveys if that's the kind of price of a premium. But potentially in a commercial environment, potentially in a high net worth or ultra high net worth environment, or where there is specific risk, that's well worth doing, albeit for the customer to pay for the customer to part pay for, or for the insurer to pay for. Those pre-loss surveys can well do a lot of good. Severity, as I mentioned, if something happens, well, what we want to do is find out about it quickly. We could have a device that would automatically monitor and know when there is leakage happening, and we'll come into some of those things a little bit later. We could perhaps link to a building manager. We could take action and link to a professional to come and knock on the door in the same way that you might with, for example, a fire alarm in your office building. When something happens, it could well be linked to the fire station who come and do something before you even know that you've got a particular problem. And then finally, the third example I mentioned, payment. So if we can pay claims faster, for example, you may have come across already some of the parametric offerings from people like Flood Flash, saying that, okay, well, we've got a particular issue. We've said that at a certain point of depth of water, we will pay out. That's automatically paid out within a day, and people are able to get on with their business and avoid the consequential costs that come back to insurers. Next, please, Ian. So just looking at a few of these in turn, residential, there's what's in it for me? Well, clearly for insurers, there's an ability to control costs, to trying to control the lower average claim cost or frequency. There is a potential to improve customer loyalty. Insurance in the UK has become very much a commodity, and it's something that many people have tried to do something about, but it's very difficult. So there is a reason sometimes for offering the Internet of Things solutions, or part offering them, to perhaps improve loyalty. Maybe we're doing a bit more for a customer than just being a grudge purchase. And innovation for a customer, giving them something that they didn't actually have, giving them knowledge, giving them the ability to take control. Next, please, Ian. For those of you who aren't so familiar with your plumbing supply, and this is kind of one of the limitations that we have in our wonderful UK building housing stock, 40% of our properties have an indirect water system. And that ends up meaning that there are three basic water systems in any property. A mains water that comes in at mains pressure, filling tanks in the loft, the low pressure water that's going to all the sinks, the showers, etc., and then a system that is to do with the central heating. The reason I mention this in this much detail is to say that if you put a smart device on the mains water in, you don't necessarily fix all of the leakage potential from, for example, a header tank in the roof. And those of you who remember 2011-12, there was a big freeze, and that's what really caused the damage, is the header tanks freezing. So there are some limitations actually with just putting valve devices in systems. If you can click in. The modern approach is a two-system approach, if you like. Everything runs off mains pressure. All new properties are built like this now, and your central heating system is just the other system. If your central heating system starts to lose water, it can do, but it will actually shut itself down. The pump will shut itself down. So we're principally we've got to think about both these systems when we're thinking about solutions in residential. Thanks, Ian. So we can provide information. We've got more and more appliances. We can identify unusual patterns of usage. We can learn what policyholders, homeowners are actually doing with their water, and we can shut water down automatically, remotely, or with local switches. We can also put devices in high-risk areas, maybe in a basement or under appliances, or in a room, for example, with expensive contents. And there's a whole bunch of options we can do. And again, I'd say that, you know, this isn't like buying a smart speaker and saying, well, everybody's got the same smart speaker and it's the same thing. It may well be different depending on the property, but there are definitely options to do. Ian, thank you. In apartments and commercial, there's obviously added risks here. There's some of the same that we would have in a residential situation, but now we've got other parties involved. We may have facilities managers, we may have building managers, we may have building management systems, and we've got the opportunity to use the data that we're collecting to take certain action as well. And there is a real opportunity to do things in a bespoke way. Next one, Ian. So if we can give some of that information on unusual patterns, if we can think about what might happen in an unoccupied flat and the impact of that damage on the 3 floors below it, for example, we can take action. The little picture that you might just about be able to see on bottom right is a very modern apartment installation showing a manifold, water coming in, 5 water meters there, all going to different apartments. Well, what are you going to do with something like that? You've got to think about how you can deal with this kind of stuff, and again, thinking about vulnerable areas as well and what you're going to do about it. Next, Ian. In a commercial property, there's some interesting things that we may or may not think about, which can give extra value to customers in a commercial environment, whether that's an airport or whether it's an office block. But for example, it could tell you that you've got water being used at 2 o'clock in the morning, which is a leak, which is running into a toilet. That's not causing a problem, but it is spending a lot of money when you've got 50 toilets in the building. And you could give somebody something back in terms of value, which they hadn't really thought that they were going to get from their insurer. It could tell you that actually these toilets are used a great deal and these other ones aren't. Well, therefore, maybe you should change your maintenance program. There's a whole bunch of things that this kind of data can give you that at first sight is not obvious. Next, Ian. So just to summarize for me from now, there are definitely opportunities for cost savings. I haven't really mentioned the environmental benefits, and maybe that's not on the top of everybody's agenda, but it's starting to get there, and it's absolutely a real opportunity to control water leakage and usage by using some of this technology. I think I've just touched on the policyholder loyalty and perhaps given a flavour of the fact that there are opportunities with these kind of devices to really be innovative and do things beyond what customers' expectations are. So I'll hand over to Andreas to give you a bit more detail of some of the things we've already been doing within Polygon.
All right, thank you very much, Jeremy. All right, so talking about Internet of Things, it obviously starts with the things. So I'm gonna start with talking you through some of the devices, although we see the total IoT solution so basically consists of a lot more different components. There is a lot of simple sensors and there's a lot of more advanced type of sensors out in the marketplace, and you can use them, you know, as a standalone unit, or you can combine it into a more comprehensive solution to fit the specific needs that you have. So if you look at the bottom left, that's like the very simple type of sensor that reacts whenever it gets in contact with water, sends across the signal to a platform, and the platform sends the signal to the facility manager or to the person living in the building, or whatever that can be. If you look at the more advanced version of that one, it basically logs temperature and relative humidity as well, which is additional data points that you can draw some additional analysis out from, and I will show you an example of that later on. In the middle, you have devices that basically is tracking the water flow. They are non-invasive, which basically means you don't need to have a certified plumber to get them installed. They keep track of the water flowing in the system and try to sort of detect when there is flow that's excessive over time, for example, or it's happening at a certain time point when it should not be happening, depending on the pattern that that specific household or property is showing, like Jeremy was mentioning before. And then you have on the top right corner, that's basically where you get the outstanding best effect. It's when you have a shut-off valve. And obviously it comes with a slightly higher cost, but it basically do a lot of the things that the other devices do. It keeps tracks of the water flow. So whenever you are above a certain flow rate, it cuts off the water, because if you are above a certain flow rate, it might be a strong indication that the pipe has burst or something like that. It also keeps track of water flow over time. So if you have a continuous water flow that goes over a certain threshold value, it can warn you, or it can switch the water off. Or if a certain volume has been passing through the valve in a continuous flow, then it can send you a warning, or it can switch off. Typically, the more advanced devices also track pressure, and that's a very effective way of finding micro leakages in a plumbing system. So basically, it runs a test cycle once a day, or depending on what frequency you set, to see if there is a pressure drop in the plumbing system. And that's a way that you can detect in a very, very early stage small micro leakages. And that enables you to take action before something actually becomes a much larger issue, obviously. Frequently also measure the temperature on the incoming pipe. I don't know, that might not be specifically a case in the UK, but here in the Nordics, it's a fairly common problem that incoming water freeze whenever we get sub-zero temperatures or like really low temperatures in our case. So that can send a warning to whoever is the property owner and basically say that you may have a problem pretty soon, so you may take some action here. So moving on to the next one, which is a poll, right?
Yeah, that's right. Thanks, Andreas. So we're just going to run a quick poll, which Ben will launch for us in a second. So if you're in an office block, what would you want a smart leak detection device to do? So there are 4 options there, and we'd love it if you could all get involved and just give a view, please. Okay, so we've got a good mix of answers there. I think we've probably got all the ones in we're going to get. Ben, if you could share that poll, please. So yeah, on the whole, I think sort of around 50%, all of the above. But yeah, so a range there to notify somebody, to shut the water off and inform somebody, and a smaller percentage looking to notify a designated third party. Anything to add, Jeremy or Andreas?
No, I guess I mean it's really saying do something about it, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you all for that. Thanks, Ben. And we're gonna move on now if we can with that poll. Thanks, Ben.
Move on to the next slide,
yeah.
please.
There we go. There you go, Andreas.
All right, yes. So it's leading us into this, basically that, I mean, Internet of Things and those sensor-based solution is basically the infrastructure that you put in place. But to get sort of additional value out of that type of investment is a combination, of course, that you tie it into whatever services processes that you have. And as Jeremy was pointing out, I mean, the starting phase for any type of property is, of course, to see what type of sensors do I need to get the largest possible effect. You know, what are the areas that are specifically sensitive that I really want to protect, so you get a cost-effective solution in place. Then the technology obviously helps you to do early detection and detect deviations as well, which I will touch upon in later slides. But when you see that something has gone wrong, you also need to take care of it immediately and make sure that you take appropriate action. And that's where you need to sort of tie into whatever processes you have in place already for emergency cases or similar things, so that you can get a quick assessment, a shortcut basically from the first point of loss or the indication of that to taking appropriate action. That basically means that you can limit the damage that has occurred. And that's obviously where you can get a lot of environmental benefits, but also a lot of cost benefits, because you need to do less renovation, take away less material, for example. So that's a great benefit. So if you move on to the next one. This is a typical example of a customer journey. This is from the residential segment, but it looks pretty much the same for the commercial customer as well. When you basically sign up for the service and you do some initial survey, you gather a lot of information about the property where you're gonna install things, and you basically plan for the installation phase. In the installation phase, you get the sensors in place, you do the commissioning, you test everything that is working the way that you have anticipated, and then you basically hand over to the surveillance phase. And in the best of worlds, it's nothing should go wrong, but you have basically algorithms in tracking the data in real time, both on a device level, but also on a platform level, keeping track of the data that you get in from the platform, basically, and notify users whenever something goes wrong, or provide smart recommendations to the user, basically. But then things can go wrong, of course, and that's where you need to connect it to, as we said before, to your business processes, or you need to send a notification and make sure that someone takes action on whatever alarm you have gotten from your system. This is also an important piece when it comes to improving IoT-based solutions. Of course, it's also that you get feedback from the field, what has actually been it's one thing that you can get a notification from a system, but the second thing is that you really want to know what has actually happened and how, you know, was it a major leakage, was it a minor one, so you can learn continuously from the data and help to sort of refine the type of actions that you take at a certain point in time. And in the worst of worlds, you need to sort of take additional action and make, do some mitigation to the actual problem as well. So if you move on to the next slide, please. So basically, there's a bunch of components in any type of IT-based solution. Obviously, the sensors is the starting point, but then you always have, regardless if it's consumer or if it's professional user, you always have to sort of tie into whatever user interface that specific person is used to working with. So if it's a consumer, it's typically an app on your phone. It can be branded by the insurance company or by the service provider. Or if it's a field technician, it basically ties into whatever solution they are using. That's one piece of it. The second one, what you see in the top right corner, that's actually a screenshot from Stockholm, where I'm sitting right now. That's basically a dashboard view of sensors and deployments within the region. And it's a management tool for basically keeping track of installed sensors and the different status but also to be able to sort of manage a lot of devices at scale. So it might be, for example, that you want to change the rules for what's happening at a certain type of alarms. You want to change the threshold values or the sensitivity or whatever it is, so that you have an efficient mechanism for managing a large population of sensors. And what's in between here, and doesn't really say in the picture as well, there's obviously the connectivity piece here. It's relatively straightforward when you go in the residential segment, because then you can rely on the Wi-Fi network of an individual. Although, if you want to provide it as a managed service and take responsibility for it, it's always a risk to be dependent on someone's own Wi-Fi connection. So, for example, whenever someone changes their internet provider, the service may go down. They may change the router and neglect to sort of reinstall everything again. So that basically means that you've taken an investment for a solution that is not up and running, basically. So the connectivity piece is an important thing to sort of consider whenever you go for those kind of solutions. If you go into more the commercial space and commercial properties, that also comes with a different set of challenges when it comes to connectivity. There's obviously, a lot of different options, cellular, it can be LoRa networks, or it can be a managed Wi-Fi network, but it can be tricky environments to get, good signal strengths, and you need to make sure that the sensors are actually up and running as you expect them to be, and that they are up and running over time as well, which can be a challenge as well, and that you keep track of that. And then, of course, there's an analytics piece to it as well, that you can crunch data and draw different type of conclusions based on the data to improve your own service, but also to add more value to your customers as well. And I will show you a couple of examples in the next two slides on how that will look like. But before switching to the next slide, I can also add that another important factor that people may not think of is basically the way that the data flows from the sensor into the platform and then off to whoever is going to take care of the signal. As we know, there's more and more regulations on data flows and which path data can take. Some clients may not think about this, others can be pretty strict about it, that data should not leave the country, for example, or should not leave Europe, or whatever it can be. So that's also another aspect to consider when you look at different type of IoT solutions. We can move on to the next slide, please. There we go. So this is an example of 1,000 sensors in Sweden over a year's time frame. So basically, you can see on the top right, on the top chart, it's the humidity levels at the place where the sensor were located. You can follow the seasonal patterns. It started off in the summertime here, like in October. It gets dry in the winter, and then the humidity goes back up again during the summertime. So basically, all the sensors in this neighborhood follows the same kind of pattern. So whenever a sensor deviates from that pattern, you can start to look at it and see, okay, there might be actually something wrong at this place. Why is the humidity increasing much faster at this property compared to like all the surrounding properties? That gives you a first indication that something may be wrong here. So that's one thing. The second thing that you can see in this chart, that some of the values are above certain threshold levels that we know are at high risk of mold growth and similar things. So you can see a lot out of those sensors, and this is a concrete example. I mean, where this were black spots before you put sensors in here, you were not aware of those problems. But here we put we get data points and we get the problems highlighted at a fairly early stage as well. So if you move on to the next one, I will show you another example. This is basically data that we get out of a smart valve, basically through keeping track of the pressure. And normally you have, this may differ between different markets, but normally you should have a relatively steady pressure, and it normally follows a cycle over the day. But what you can see for this specific household is that it has an average pressure which is slightly below 4 bar, but it does show some pressure spikes. And that is obviously something that is adding a lot of stress into the plumbing system. and that's excess risk, basically. So there's two ways of looking at this data, basically. The first one is obviously, okay, this is a risk household because the plumbing system in this specific house is exposed to excess risk. So we need to do something to take down that risk. That's basically, you can install a pressure reducing nipple, for example, that takes away those spikes. The second way of looking upon this data is basically that, you know, if there is a water leakage that occurs when you have those pressure spikes, the insurer can go back to the municipality and say, hey, you know what, we're seeing problems, you know, due to pressure spikes, we have had, you know, X amount of leakages. And you can start to do a commercial discussion around that and how you should be reimbursed as an insurance company, basically. So there's a lot of insights to be drawn from data. And I think we are just building out. IoT basically provides us with the infrastructure, and we gather a lot of data, and we start to see a lot of interesting things that we can do with that data. And I think there's so many more use cases to come along the road once we have the infrastructure in place at a very large scale. But this is some examples. So I hand over to the next poll.
Yep. Thanks, Andreas. So we're so we're onto a poll. So Ben, if you could launch the poll. This is really, if you imagine, if you are an underwriter, if you are, then that will be pretty easy for you. If you're not, imagine you're an underwriter. What do you think you could use the data produced for by a smart leak detection device? Okay, we've still got some people polling, which is good. Thank you for contributing. So we've probably reached a bit of stability there. So yeah, if you could share the results, Ben, that would be fantastic. Thank you. So so a joined up service, the policyholder enabling actions to third parties to reward customers by reducing premiums over time, or to reward customers by offering reduced excesses or something else. So looks as though on the face of it, the majority would be looking to reduce premiums over time. Hopefully that would, if you can reduce premiums over time, then you will get you know, longer term or lifetime value from those customers, which would be a pretty good benefit. Any other comments, Jeremy, Andreas?
No, not really, nothing to add really.
Okay. Thank you for contributing to that. So we shall move on. So next one should be there, Andreas.
Yeah, just to wrap things up, I mean, basically when we talk about IoT-based type of solutions, basically we see a combination of connected services, access to remote assistance, so you can get like early guidance on how to take care of whatever problem that has occurred in your property. And then of course, a combination of on-site services so that you can take, you know, effective action, basically.
And the next one.
The next one, please.
So I guess just to summarize what Andreas and I have been saying, as I said to start with, this is a flavor and it can't be much more than that in a presentation of this length, but I hope it gives you an idea of both the complexity and some of the potential solutions and some of the really exciting possibilities that applying appropriate IoT in this environment can give. Because it's really not just about cost, it's definitely about an added service, and it's potentially building relationships in a bigger way and a deeper way with customers beyond perhaps what they expect from an insurer or an insurance provider. If we can target smart devices in escape of water for the appropriate property that we're trying to protect, or the contents in that property that we're trying to protect, then that will have the best impact and can certainly do a lot for us. And from a customer's perspective, I think you've during the polls highlighted some of the things that you feel that you could offer them. But without doubt, there are direct benefits for MGA members, which go beyond cost. Certainly, differentiation in terms of service, reducing the frequency in a commercial environment especially, and better retention of customers. But without doubt, I think what we've seen outside the UK, but as well as in the UK now, is that opportunity to offer customers, instead of just offering them a piece of paper that says this is insurance, offering them real peace of mind. Andreas, did you want to add anything to that summary?
No, I think that concludes pretty well. I can just elaborate on the last one. That's something we're really seeing here in the Nordic countries, actually, that a lot of the insurers are actually trying to reposition themselves and their offering to more selling peace of mind to the customers, which is an interesting move, I think.
Mm.
Okay, thank you both. So we've got one final poll before we take questions. So if you do have any questions before we run this poll, feel free to send them through. We've got 2 or 3 questions already, which we'll cover off. So if there are any more, please let us know. So poll 3 is: in the future, should installation of a smart leak detection device be a prerequisite for buying commercial property insurance? I suppose that applies for any insurance, but as Jeremy highlighted earlier, residential tends to be a lower price point, so isn't always viable. But let's see, that's yeah, really interesting. It looks like there's a high proportion of people think actually it should be a prerequisite for commercial. It's a little bit of balancing going on as polls come in. But yes, so then if you could share that, please. Yeah, 68, 69% think that it should be a prerequisite. And I suppose the challenge there is how we factor that pricing in, whether it's something that the insurance provider can factor in pricing wise, or whether it's offered as a benefit and actually reducing premiums over time covers the cost of that. Jeremy, any thoughts on how we how the market might position that going forward?
Yeah, I think it's actually we've got to try and educate people that yeah, I sort of used the analogy earlier. This isn't kind of a smart speaker that you can just buy, plug in, and it's going to be the same for everybody, because commercial properties are different. When you're looking at you know, a modern apartment block, they might have district heating. You could have all sorts of shared services. You've got shared dependencies in commercial property. But I think certainly having an approach of looking at risk and doing site surveys can add a great deal, not just to the property landlord, the tenants, and obviously to the insurers too.
Yeah, so we've actually got a question here that links quite nicely to that. So can you protect different parts of a commercial property with different devices, and how would that work? So I suppose probably an immediate answer, Jeremy, from you, and maybe something more technical from Andreas after.
Yeah, probably. So can I say yes then and hand over to Andreas?
Yes. Andreas?
You're on mute.
Oh, you're on mute, Andreas, I think.
Ah, sorry. That was a quick answer, Jeremy. No, but obviously, I mean, there's a lot of different types of solutions. But I think, I mean, it's a matter of, as Jeremy said before, I mean, you need to look at where you get the biggest effect and what kind of, you know, specific solutions that adds value for that specific type of property. So it's not really one size fits all here. It's more about using a lot of standard components, but combine them in a way that makes sense for your specific property and the specific ambition that you have when it comes to protecting it. You may have different usage patterns for 2 fairly similar type of properties, but different type of problems. And then, of course, you need to put in place different type of solutions to do that. But I mean, the basic components is basically the type of sensors that I mentioned in my first slide here on you know, you have one sensor that reacts whenever it gets in contact with water. You can extend that with a rope to cover a larger distance. You have sensors that measure the water flow in pipes, and you have valves that cut off the water, basically. That's the basic components that any IoT type of solution will use. And then you tie it together with software, basically,
So and Andreas, so you could therefore have a look at areas of the property or the business that have high value assets in one area where you want to make sure the water's cut off, and therefore might spend a little bit more on it, but actually other areas where it's not so much a risk, but you do want to know, you want to be told when something's happened, but it's not going to prevent you from trading, or it's not going to cause a lot of damage, and you could have a combination of those things.
Exactly.
Yeah, fabulous. Thank you.
And Ian, just to add to my one-word answer, I mean, I'd say, you know, if you just building on your point, I mean, you know, we've got a whole range here from heritage through to office blocks through to lawyers' offices where I always sort of note that they keep a lot of their documents in the basement and perhaps not realizing that water rolls downhill. There are certain places that, as you rightly say, you want to perhaps know about humidity. So not just liquid water, but you want to know that you might be having a problem on the storage of artifacts, for example, in a heritage environment, which are going to have potential mold problems if they're living in that type of environment. So you can absolutely mix and match all of those different sensors and devices to give you the answer you want and provide a huge amount of value.
Okay, thanks, Jeremy. We've got another question here. So we've attempted to include this service in our underwriting offering. On paper, it's a great risk management solution. In reality, the logistics are challenging. So linking contractors, homeowners, suppliers together, establishing specification, establishing mains diameter, etc. It is a hard thing to do in an automated fashion. I suppose that's more of a statement, and really just get a view of that. It sounds like that the complexity can create difficulty. Jeremy,
I think
but there'll be a way around it.
I think that's dead right, but that's actually very much supporting, I think, the comment that both Andreas and I were making earlier, that it really isn't I think sometimes we've been sold in the UK this idea that, oh, well, just go and buy one of these, fit it, and you'll be fine. And that really isn't the case. In a very simple world, you can go and fit a sensor and stick it under your dishwasher, and you can do that in a commercial environment too. And that will give you one message from that one place. But unless you really identify the risks and the potential damages, then you're missing the point, really. And it does rely on somebody to go to do a site survey. You know, if you're in a hotel environment or something like that, or an office environment, you know, where are those services coming in? How do they end up going to where they're going to end up being outlets, and where are likely to be the problems? You know, if it leaks here, is that going to be a problem? If something leaks into a toilet area, is that going to be a problem? Well, probably not a major problem, other than you're going to waste water because it's designed to get wet. So it's definitely horses for courses.
Okay, thanks, Jeremy. So another question here. So what is the average cost for a single house unit protection system? And then a follow-up to that, also, what is the cost for a typical commercial installation, single purpose built industrial unit? And are there any ongoing service charges? So I suppose it's be a range of answers depending on whether you want the device to just notify or to shut off and do something else. So is there a range of prices for those, and other service charges ongoing?
Yes, I mean, that's definitely a how long is a piece of string answer. So the simplest sensors that will detect water, you can buy one off Amazon, because I did, for about a tenner. And you can fit 2 AA batteries in it, and you can connect it to your phone, and it will make a beeping noise if it detects water. So that's at one end of the scale. Andreas sort of showed the little graph talking about the if you like, the complexity and versus cost, or the functionality versus cost. And for a commercial environment, I mean, we've fitted them into our factory units, for example, in Polygon in the UK, and they cost a few grand. Sometimes you are spending a small amount a month, maybe 5 or 10 quid a month to sign up to some kind of service. But it really does depend on the kind of sensors you're doing. If you're talking about, say, a 5-inch water supply pipe, then you're talking about a bit of a chunky piece of brass there and quite a big valve. So you've actually got a whole range, from 15 millimeters to 125 millimeters diameter, and you've got a whole mix of costs. Andreas, I don't know if you want to add anything to any of that.
No, but I mean, I completely agree to what you're saying there, Jeremy, but there's also other things to it, as I mentioned. I mean, you want to make sure that it's, operating over time, and, so whatever money you spend day one, you want to make sure that that money is basically operational throughout its, technical length. So that's another layer to it. How do you ensure that you can manage it effectively? So I think it makes sense to look at sort of the full life cycle of the investment that you're doing as well in the technology, and not only the device cost, because that's just a piece of it.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. We've got another couple of questions, I think. I'm just keeping an eye on time, so we've got a few minutes before 2, but so do we think that building regulations will require fitting of these devices on new builds where they have direct systems?
Mm-hmm. Well, in Norway, Andreas, they've been doing this on residential homes for, what, 8 years, is it?
Yeah, I think it's from 2011, exactly.
Yeah. I guess the challenge is, yes, they may well do, and it would be good for building regs to start to catch up with some of these things. The challenge is, obviously, there are 20 million homes in the UK, and what are we building a year? 250,000, if that. While it will be good for new homes to get the new technology required, it's going to be a drop in the ocean compared to the, if you like, the existing home numbers out
Stock,
there.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. And one more question at the moment. So for residential properties, it seems high frequency, low value claims are becoming more common prior to a large loss. What would you suggest we are asking someone in terms of remedial works undertaken who has suffered a couple of small losses? Is it just a matter of asking for plumbing reports of the entire property? So I suppose the question is, are we asking people to provide some background if they've had a couple of small leaks before, so that we can determine how to help them protect the property? Is that feasible, do we think?
I guess it's an interesting thing there, because actually I would say that there's people on this call who are far more experienced than I am in the world of insurance, but my understanding is the frequency of water damage claims has actually dropped significantly over the last 15 years, probably due to the fact that excesses have discouraged a lot of those small claims. So people haven't been claiming for trivial stuff because it's got to be decent sized, otherwise they won't even bother. In terms of a property that is having more than one water damage claim, then one could certainly see the situation where it would be advisable to say, well, before I insure you again, you need to have some kind of survey to come and have a look and see if you've got a problem. And that's so certainly some of the preventative surveys that we've done. If you're looking, for example, in a high net worth type of environment at let's just say a flat in St John's Wood, which, as we all know, would cost you quite a bit of money, and the sort of person that lives in it has probably got quite expensive contents, but that property was probably built in the 19th century and has got perhaps early 20th century plumbing. It's, from an insurance perspective, it's probably worthwhile going and getting a survey done before signing up to insure it, because it's inherently potentially risky. I mean, if that could become the norm, that somebody like a car got an MOT on their property plumbing, then that would make life an awful lot better and inform, obviously, the insurer.
So I think whilst there might have been some a couple of smaller losses, actually it's worth looking at the age and the construction of the property to determine what your likely risk is, and also the value of the sums insured, the value of the contents, the property at risk are really. And so, as you were saying, Jeremy, the typical run-of-the-mill household insurance policy might be £300-400, and it becomes quite expensive, and it's not viable to do surveys. It's not viable to pay for the installation of devices. But actually, if you've got a £3,000-5,000 policy on a private client type arrangement for a 19th century townhouse or apartment block, then it's probably is worth your while, because you might be on for £100,000 claim if there's a burst pipe.
And yes, I agree with that. The other thing I'd add is that anybody, and I don't know if anybody on this call has had a significant water leakage or damage in their home, but if you've had one, you don't want another. So after you've done a claim, is that not a time also to say to somebody, look, I can help you so this doesn't happen again?
Absolutely, yes, yeah. So there's a follow-up to that claim. Okay, so there are all the questions that we've been asked. Thank you to everybody that has taken part. Thank you to those of you who have asked the questions. Jeremy, Andreas, is there anything you want to add?
Just thanks from me for participating, everybody. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Pleasure.
Okay, thank you very much. We're available if anybody wants to have a chat about it in any more detail. I think we're aware that in terms of how you consider these kinds of devices in the insurance product, it can be complicated, but I think it can be very worthwhile depending on the market that you're offering products to. I think it gives you the opportunity to offer lifetime value as well to customers, particularly if you're supporting them in avoiding such awful claims, because they are if you get a big escape of water. And if you can offer them reduced premiums or reduced excesses because they are protecting their properties, then that could be a real differentiator for you. But thank you all very much. We really appreciate you joining. And as I say, feel free to contact us if you want any further information, or we can help you with any further questions. Thank you.